Greetings fellow undead, I'm PvPSkillz and I'm going to be your host today. I'm going to share my wish list for Dark Souls 3 and talk about the things I'd love to see implemented or things that can be improved from previous iterations of the Souls series. I'm going to look at the Souls series plus Bloodborne in order to find and explore my favorite aspects of each one of them and reflect these in this video. Furthermore, I'm going to also consider the things that people saw in the E3 demo where Miyazaki himself presented the game. So, without further ado, let's start. Equip load and armor. As most of you know, every game in the Souls series have different caps on equip load, but they ultimately all work in a similar manner. When you hit a specific percentage in your equip load, the game determines how fast you are and what type of roll you do, such as fast rolling, which you had to be under 25% equip load in Dark Souls 1 and under 70% in Dark Souls 2. Then you had the medium roll, which was the middle ground when it comes to rolling, and finally you had the horrible fat rolling, which is the slowest, but you can still go beyond that, and if you go beyond that, you literally can't do anything. When you medium/fat roll, you basically bring a whole bunch of disadvantages, yet not a single advantage. You will basically have a much slower stamina regeneration that is comparable to turtle speed, plus less invincibility frames when you roll, and backstep, coupled with much slower rolls that doesn't protect you from anything, in addition to rolling like 1 centimeter away from the character, which means you can't roll further away like fast rolling in order to avoid a dangerous situation. So it's literally meaningless to ever fat roll, like really, it's literally meaningless, because your survivability statistically drop significantly and you literally become a walking punch bag. I would love to see fat rolling become associated with tank builds, since in the Souls series, all of the tanks flip like a ninja, block like a Spartan, and take much less damage as if they were giants. This further makes fat rolling more disenfranchised, and there is much less incentive to do it. I would love to see advantages being added to fat rolling, such as getting a poise boost, aka not getting interrupted while attacking. A significant defense boost will also be nice. I'm not a game designer, I don't claim to be, but there has to be a way to make fat rolling viable, which also in turn let people choose their favorite armor without being heavily impeded. I would also love to see Dark Souls 1 and Bloodborne stamina regeneration come back, because in Dark Souls 2 it was very slow, which really makes combat more of a patience game than a tactical one. In summary, I would like an equip load system that adds to the role-playing aspect of the game. If you want to play swiftly as a ninja, you should be wearing cloth or low weight armor, but at the same time receive significantly more damage when hit. Tank builds should be slow but have a ton of defense. Any enhancement of these roles is welcomed as long as it's balanced and enjoyable. Tell me what you think, guys, about this, about equip load and armor. I would love to hear your opinions about this in the comment section below. Healing. Healing is a very controversial topic in each and every Souls games. Demon Souls had super fast healing with farmable healing items, while Dark Souls 1 had a slower yet still fast healing system with limited heals between bonfire resting. In Dark Souls 2, they introduced a new healing item called life gems. You can stack these easily and you can buy them very cheaply in the start of the game, making the game much easier, and worrying about healing wasn't a problem anymore like Dark Souls 1. Life gems really diminished the importance of the Estus Flask, on top of making the Estus Flask heal much slower, making an impractical healing item during battle, thus increasing your reliance on life gems. Bloodborne had the same healing philosophy to Demon Souls, but much better refined. Since this is my wish list for Dark Souls 3, I'm going to focus mainly on Dark Souls 1 and 2. In Dark Souls 1 we had limited amount of healing flasks in trips between bonfires. There's other ways to heal, but it was very restrictive in nature and you cannot depend on them at all, thus making the Estus Flask your major way of healing, making it so much more important than in Dark Souls 2. With limited amount of healing, You have to really plan when to use the Estus Flask, making healing a tactical decision. This aspect truly adds to the sense of dread in the game, making it that much more atmospheric. In Dark Souls 2, this aspect was thrown out of the window by giving you a huge supply of healing items, making the game much less risky, and making trips between bonfires a very easy task, which in turn made bonfires not as important as they were in Dark Souls 1. I will never forget the feeling of happiness I had when I found a new bonfire in Dark Souls 1. So I'd really love if they use Dark Souls 1 healing system in Dark Souls 2 with a few tweaks here and there, and any improvement is welcome. I personally don't want to see life gems again, but that's me. Tell me what you think about this and which system do you favor. Please let me know. PvP and Covenants. PvP is a very important aspect and mechanic in the Souls series, and it prolongs the life of the game significantly. Covenants are like different factions that the player can choose to affiliate with, deepening the role-playing angle in the game, plus giving you tools and equipment exclusive to each covenant. This on paper sounds amazing, but in practice, it did not really work as intended. In Dark Souls 1 you had like 3 or 4 functioning covenants, but making others almost useless. Dark Souls 2 had the same issues, but it was definitely improved upon. But there was still the problem that some barely work, meaning finding other players using specific covenants was a waiting contest, and you can barely find anyone online. I think covenants is a very important aspect that must be improved upon and expanded in Dark Souls 3. We humans are naturally tribalistic in nature, and would love to swear allegiance to one covenant for a cause you believe is the right one, regardless if it enhances PvP or PvP, or if it was more fun or not. Improving the covenant system will definitely enhance the overall experience in Dark Souls 3, and I would want to see them not repeat the mistakes they did in Bloodborne, where they neglected this part of the game. I want that feeling when you get, when for example I found the well-hidden Dragon Covenant in Dark Souls 1. I will never forget that, because it was such a cool thing. I would love to see arenas come back as big and expansive as ever, because it really caters to people who like the competitive aspect of the Souls series. Any improvement to PvP, such as better game mechanics, more customization, limitless amount of builds, and other things will always be great, and I can't wait to see what they have done with this in Dark Souls 3. Tell me what you like to see in Dark Souls 3 in terms of PvP in the comment section below. Boss design in the Souls series is one of its strong suits in general. It makes certain boss encounters much more memorable than your average game. They throw out to a challenging boss that can be defeated in so many different ways, and they add epic music to the mix and make it relatable within the lore and the plot in the game, and you will have something that is really special, that it will be ingrained in your memory. No one can forget Ornstein and Smough, the battle in Dark Souls 1, or Calamite, Sin the Sunburned Dragon, Fume Knight, Ceralone, Artorias, Sif, Vicar Amelia, Gwyn, Gehrman the First Hunter, etc, etc. That doesn't mean that all boss fights are great. Actually, some of them are very bad. Like, the Bed of Chaos in Dark Souls 1, that's like the worst boss in the whole series. Or the Prowling Magus and the Congregation in Dark Souls 2. So in Dark Souls 3, I really want to see better mechanics when playing against bosses. I thought bosses will never get that much better after the many disappointing bosses in Dark Souls 2. Their attacks just felt unnatural, and they were very easy in general. There were only some challenging bosses, especially in the DLC. Then of course, we had Bloodborne, which really took boss fights to the next level. The bosses had much more natural movements and feel, and had precise hitboxes which prevented cheap hits from bosses. The ones from like Dark Souls 2, there was a lot of this problem. Also, most bosses had different weak points, like their limbs for example, so you had to get precise hits in order to deal more damage to bosses, thus promoting smart and tactical play, which can be very rewarding. Furthermore, each boss had 2 to 3 phases, I think. Yeah, most bosses had 3 phases, but some did have 2, which, changes depending on the boss's HP. This forces the player to adapt to different strategies during the same fight, which increases the depth of boss battles by a big margin. So I definitely want Dark Souls 3 to use similar boss design philosophy as Bloodborne, since this was the best we've seen so far, at least in my opinion and many others I know. I would love to see also something similar to Chalice Dungeons. I know that many people say Chalice Dungeons was a disappointment, but I'm not talking about the random generation of maps or any level design for that matter. I'm talking about the challenging bosses and enemies. It gave hardcore players a chance to truly test their skills, and I freaking love it. Defeating some of these bosses was so satisfying and rewarding at the same time. I would love to see Dark Souls 3 feature an optional area or something similar that really tests the player's perseverance and skill. Many great games have this philosophy, such as Final Fantasy games, where they include super bosses that need a lot of preparing and planning just in order to compete with them. This offers a lot of great things for hardcore players, so we'll see if they include something like that when the game is released. I really want to know your opinion about this, and tell me what you want to see to happen to the bosses in Dark Souls 3. Lore. Lore in the Souls series is very cryptic and often encourages the player to check the environment and item descriptions in order to find out bits and pieces of the plot. This really increases the sense of mystery of the world and makes it much more immersive. I really want nothing changed in the storytelling aspect of the game, but I really want a grander and more epic story, but this is subjective. I really did not like the story in Dark Souls 2 because it was too dependent on what happened in Dark Souls 1. One thing that was lacking in Dark Souls 2 was NPC interactions. It was definitely inferior to Dark Souls 1 in my opinion. In Dark Souls 1, NPCs were much more interesting, they were much more developed, they actually had a quest line where they all end up hollowing, and you had to really work the story through them, and they give you every time a bit or piece of the lore, Dude, it wasn't that way in Dark Souls 2. There's no NPC I root for in Dark Souls 2. Really think for example Solaire, or there's so many NPCs that were just so beloved in Dark Souls 1, and it never happened again in Dark Souls 2. So I hope they strengthen that aspect in Dark Souls 3, especially also in Bloodborne. NPC interactions also wasn't that special. So I hope in NPC aspect that they really build upon a quest line, and that really adds to the world. So let me start talking about the things that YouTubers and journalists saw at E3 in the Dark Souls 3 demo. Most everybody said, I heard their opinions, I read some of the stuff, and all of them said that the combat was faster than in Dark Souls 2 and 1, and that is a very good thing. I love the faster the better for me, although I don't want it as fast as Bloodborne because that's its own thing, but it seems very interesting. And they talked about that sword arts and all that, and that you can go anywhere, where there was a spot where Miyazaki told them that you can go anywhere from that view, which was spectacular. And in general I was really impressed in everything I heard, but one thing I'm worried about. I heard some people saying that backstabs are the same as Dark Souls 1, and I think they just saw one example of a backstab, and so many people gave different accounts, but they all agree that it's very fast and it looks like Dark Souls 1. I hope they learn from that. I hope they don't do it, and it was just this in the demo, because one of the most things that I dislike in the whole Souls series was the Dark Souls 1 backstab. So I hope they don't put that back. And why I didn't talk about map design or level design? Because it's Miyazaki on the helm, guys. Miyazaki on the helm. He did the Dark Souls 1 Bloodborne interconnected beauty level design. He's just a boss when it comes to this, and I really trust him, so I'm not worried about that at all. And the best thing I love about the Souls series is the combat, and that's why I love Dark Souls. It's pure gameplay. It's hardcore. It's not go get me a piece of wood to go through that door, or mix this herb with that so you can get faster, find these trees. You know what I mean? These meaningless quests in so many games, and you just go play and you don't have to like listen to anyone if you want. Yeah, that's one of its charms. Yeah, but yeah, anyways, this is the end of this video. I really talked for a lot, so I hope you enjoyed this, and I really thank you for watching and listening until now, and I'll see you on my next video. Peace, guys.